It took Amelia 3 minutes to lose the job that kept her family afloat. She saw an old man shivering outside the counter and quietly handed him a bowl of soup and bread about to be thrown away. Her manager Jason caught her, snatched the receipt from her hand, and fired her in front of everyone. She untied her apron, blinking back tears as she walked out the door. The next morning, Jason stood before the board presenting his profit numbers when the conference room door opened. The old man from yesterday walked in, and everything Jason built began crumbling. If you truly believe kindness always carries weight, stay with this story and watch exactly how Jason pays for it. The winter morning in Columbus was bitter enough that customers came in shaking snow from their coats, and the location near the office district filled up fast. Amelia arrived before the sun did, checking tables, restocking napkins, helping the kitchen catch up, and quietly covering for a coworker who had called in sick without anyone asking her to. She had worked the morning shift at Harrison Table for 4 years, long enough that the rhythm of the place lived in her hands before her mind caught up. She was the kind of employee other servers leaned on without noticing they were leaning. She handed back change a customer had forgotten on the counter before he reached the door. She smoothed over an order mix-up for a coworker without making a show of it. She never angled for credit, and at the end of every shift she checked what food was left over, not because anyone told her to, but because throwing away something edible bothered her more than most things did. Jason ran the location with the opposite instinct. He moved through the floor reminding servers to push the average ticket higher, forbidding any food from leaving the building without a paid transaction attached to it, and pressing staff to upsell items customers had not asked for and often did not want. Profit margins were the only language he seemed fluent in, and he made sure everyone around him spoke it too. He kept a laminated card of talking points near the register, phrases servers were expected to recite when a customer hesitated over a menu item, and he timed how long tables sat empty between parties, as if every unoccupied chair were a personal insult. The staff had learned to read his moods the way sailors read weather. On slow mornings he paced. On busy mornings he hovered behind the counter checking receipts against inventory, as though he expected someone to be quietly robbing him. He rarely raised his voice, which somehow made the tension worse, because his criticism arrived clipped and precise, delivered just quietly enough that customers rarely noticed but loudly enough that the person receiving it never forgot it. Just before noon, Amelia noticed an older man standing outside the glass door in a worn coat, not asking anyone for money, just looking in, seeming ready to walk away rather than draw attention. His shoulders were hunched against the cold, and his hands were tucked deep into his pockets. But there was something steady in the way he stood, nothing desperate about him, only tired. She stepped outside and asked if he needed anything. He said his name was Samuel, that he only wanted somewhere warm for a few minutes, and asked what the cheapest bowl of soup cost. He checked his pockets and admitted quietly that he did not have enough. Amelia noticed his voice did not match his coat. It was calm, measured, the voice of a man used to being listened to rather than dismissed. She brushed the thought aside, telling herself plenty of people carried themselves with dignity regardless of what life had handed them that particular winter. Amelia knew the kitchen had one last portion of soup and bread from the lunch batch, food that would not be sellable the next day and was already destined for the trash. She confirmed with the cook that it could not be served again, then brought it out to Samuel herself. She had not touched anyone else's order, had not taken money from the register, and had made no attempt to hide what she was doing. Samuel asked if she was not afraid of getting in trouble. Amelia told him she was more afraid of watching food get thrown out while someone nearby was hungrier than she was. Samuel studied her for a long moment but said nothing about who he actually was. Jason stepped out of the back office just then, spotted the bowl in front of Samuel, and immediately demanded to see a receipt. Amelia explained the food had come from the end-of-day discard batch. Jason was not interested in the explanation. He announced, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, that Amelia had just stolen company property. The dining room went quiet. Samuel started to rise to correct him, but Amelia gave him a small look asking him not to. Jason ordered her into his office immediately. Inside the office, Jason slid a violation form across the desk before Amelia could fully explain herself. He said policy was policy, and that if every employee started making their own judgment calls, the business would bleed money $1 at a time. Amelia pointed out that the food had already been marked for disposal, that she had checked with the kitchen first, and that the company had lost nothing from what she did. Jason shifted from policy to something more personal. He told her she had a habit of being too soft, and that this was exactly why she would never be right for the supervisor role she had once applied for. It was the first time Amelia realized he might have been the reason that promotion never came through, not some vague scheduling issue she had been told about at the time. He gave her two options: sign a statement admitting she had taken company property without authorization, or be terminated for refusing to comply. Amelia asked to see the actual policy in writing, the one that supposedly forbade giving away food already marked for disposal. Jason told her policy did not need to be printed out for her to understand it. That common sense should have told her the same thing. Amelia felt something harden in her chest. She had spent 4 years giving this company more than it had ever asked of her, and now the same company was asking her to sign away her name over a decision she still believed had been the right one. She would not put her name to a confession she did not believe was true. Jason fired her on the spot, telling her to return her apron and her employee badge and be off the premises before her shift officially ended. He did not look at her again while he said it. He was already reaching for the next form on his desk, as though the conversation had cost him more time than it deserved. Amelia walked back through the dining room under the eyes of coworkers and customers who had watched the whole exchange unfold. Samuel was still sitting at his table, visibly angry, starting to stand again. Amelia stopped him with a glance, not wanting an older man thrown out for defending her. Samuel asked for her full name. She told him it was Amelia. He asked how long she had worked there. 4 years, she said. He asked if they had really let her go over one bowl of soup. Amelia managed a small, tired smile and said maybe this was about something bigger than soup. Then she walked out. Jason crossed to Samuel's table, dropped the check in front of him, and told him flatly that if he was not ordering anything else, he needed to leave. Samuel set down a few bills without a word, more than enough to cover a bowl of soup he had never actually paid for himself. Jason turned and walked away, already moving toward the next table, already forgetting the exchange had happened at all. Samuel sat there a moment longer, watching the dining room settle back into its ordinary rhythm as though nothing had occurred, as though a woman had not just lost the job that fed her family. He glanced at the name tag pinned to Jason's shirt, memorizing it without meaning to, then took out his phone. He did not call a lawyer. He called Logan, the regional operations director, a man who had worked alongside him for nearly 15 years and who recognized the particular stillness in Samuel's voice whenever something serious was coming. Samuel said only 2 things: do not change tomorrow's meeting and do not tell Jason that he would be attending. Logan asked no questions. He simply said it would be done and hung up, already reaching for his own set of files. Hours earlier, before any of this had happened, the truth about the man in the worn coat had already been decided long ago. Samuel had founded Harrison Table nearly 3 decades before, building it from a single small diner into a regional chain that carried his name in every filing and every deed. After his wife passed away, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, though he still held the controlling share of the company and quietly kept watch over what it had become. Almost no one at the store level would have recognized him. His public appearances were years old by now, his hair different, his clothing always formal on the rare occasions cameras caught him. He preferred it that way. In the years since his wife's passing, he had grown wary of being recognized in his own restaurants, uneasy with the way people changed their behavior the moment they realized who was standing in front of them. He wanted honest rooms, not performances staged for his benefit. For months he had been receiving reports out of the Columbus location that did not add up. Profits were climbing, labor costs were falling, and on paper Jason looked like the best manager in the region. Corporate newsletters had even featured his numbers as a model for other locations to study. But turnover was rising fast, internal complaints kept appearing and then quietly disappearing from the record, and every explanation Jason offered praised his own ability to optimize. Samuel had built his career trusting numbers, but he had also learned, the hard way, that numbers only ever told part of the story. Samuel had grown suspicious that the numbers were hiding something. Rather than announce an inspection, he decided to visit the restaurant the way an ordinary customer would. He dressed down, came alone, brought no assistant and no driver. He was not trying to trick anyone or test their character through some elaborate performance. He simply wanted to see how staff treated a person who looked like he could not offer them anything in return. What he witnessed went further than anything he had expected. A woman lost her job for showing him basic decency, fired in front of a room full of strangers by a man who had not even bothered to check whether her explanation was true. Samuel had walked into that restaurant curious about spreadsheets and walked out having watched something closer to cruelty. After leaving the restaurant, Samuel asked Logan to send him, privately and immediately, Amelia's personnel file, the record of complaints filed against Jason, the reports on food waste disposal, and every promotion request from the past 2 years. He wanted names, dates, and numbers, not impressions. He had learned long ago that anger made for a poor witness, and he intended to walk into tomorrow's meeting with evidence rather than a grudge. Logan warned him that the board meeting scheduled for the next morning had originally been set to approve Jason's promotion to regional manager. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was perfect timing, because tomorrow they would get to hear, in person, exactly why Jason believed he deserved it. Amelia came home to a small apartment that suddenly felt colder than usual. She was the one who kept the household running, the one every bill in the mailbox depended on, and losing her income meant recalculating rent, groceries, and insurance before she had even taken off her coat. She sat at the kitchen table with a pen and an old envelope, writing down numbers she already knew by heart, hoping that seeing them on paper might make them less frightening than they felt in her head. It did not help much. She kept the details of her family life to herself that night, her mind too busy running numbers to think about anything else. She thought briefly about calling her sister to ask for a short loan, then decided against it, not wanting to explain the reason behind the request. Pride was a strange thing to hold on to on a night like this, but she held on to it anyway. She opened her laptop and started searching for openings nearby. Part of her considered calling Jason and apologizing just to get the job back, but she knew what that would require. Reinstatement would mean signing the same statement admitting she had stolen from the company, a confession that could follow her into every future application if it ever surfaced. Grace called that evening. She apologized for not speaking up earlier, admitting she had watched Jason use policy as a weapon before and had stayed quiet out of fear for her own position. She told Amelia this was not the first time Jason had pushed someone out this way. A former employee had once raised concerns about unpaid overtime, and within weeks that employee had been let go under some other pretext. Amelia asked if Grace had any proof. Grace admitted Jason kept such tight control over the internal systems that most staff were too frightened to say anything at all. Every complaint filed went straight to him first, which meant employees who spoke up were essentially handing their concerns to the very person they were concerned about. She revealed more than she probably intended to, that Jason often adjusted recorded hours to hit his targets, pressured employees to log spoiled food in ways that made his reports look better, and refused to allow leftover meals to be donated because, in his words, it generated no revenue. Grace's voice caught for a moment when she admitted she should have said something sooner, for Amelia and for the others before her. Amelia told her there was nothing to apologize for, that fear was not the same thing as fault, and that she understood exactly why staying quiet had felt safer. Amelia said she was not interested in revenge. She told Grace to be careful and not risk her own job over this. After they hung up, an automated email arrived from Corporate Human Resources. The stated reason for termination read misappropriation of company property. Amelia sat frozen at her kitchen table. This was far worse than simply being told she had broken a rule. Jason was building a paper trail to protect himself, and she understood it immediately. She decided that the next morning she would drive to the regional office and demand the reason for her termination be corrected. The next morning at Harrison Table's regional headquarters, Jason walked into the conference room in a pressed suit, confident and ready. Around the table sat Logan from Operations, Elizabeth from Corporate Human Resources, Ryan from Regional Finance, and 2 senior executives waiting to hear his pitch. Jason opened with a summary of the Columbus location's performance. Revenue up, food costs down, labor costs down, and profit margins clearly improved. He clicked through slides showing steady upward lines, each one framed as proof that discipline, not sentiment, was what separated a thriving location from a struggling one. He used the numbers to argue that his hardline management style produced results that spoke for themselves, results the board would be foolish not to reward with a wider region to oversee. At one point, he even mentioned the incident with Amelia as an example of his commitment to protecting company assets, offering it up almost proudly, as though it demonstrated exactly the kind of vigilance the company needed more of. Elizabeth asked what exactly had happened. Jason twisted the story, claiming Amelia had handed out free food to customers on her own initiative, that she had been combative when questioned, and that she had refused to take responsibility for her actions. He described her as a liability the company was better off without. Logan looked at him but said nothing yet. Ryan asked how much the food had actually cost. Jason answered that it was only a few dollars, but insisted the principle mattered more than the price. Elizabeth asked who had received the food. Jason smiled and said it was some homeless old man, adding that he did not think it was relevant. At that exact moment, the conference room door opened. Samuel walked in, still wearing the same worn coat from the day before. Jason recognized him instantly and turned to Logan, demanding to know why he was there. No one answered. Logan stood. Ryan stood as well. Elizabeth hesitated, then rose to her feet too. Jason remained seated. Samuel walked to the head of the table and removed his coat, folding it over the back of a chair with the same unhurried calm he had shown at the counter the day before. Underneath was a clean shirt and a tailored jacket, the kind that belonged to a man who had built boardrooms rather than merely sat in them. Logan finally spoke. He said, "Jason, this is Samuel, the founder of Harrison Table and the controlling shareholder of the company." Jason's face drained of color. Samuel looked directly at him and asked what exactly he had called him yesterday. Jason had no answer. The room stayed silent long enough that the silence itself became a kind of verdict. Samuel sat down at the head of the table, placed the exact receipt Jason had handed him the day before onto the surface in front of him, smoothing it flat with 2 fingers, and said simply, "Continue." He wanted to hear the rest of the presentation, every word of it, exactly as Jason had planned to deliver it before the door opened. Everyone in the room expected Samuel to fire Jason on the spot. Instead, he asked him to keep presenting. What followed was less a presentation and more a calm, methodical interrogation. Samuel asked why turnover had nearly doubled, why internal complaints so often closed without any signed resolution, why food marked as unusable was still forbidden from being donated, and why Amelia, despite consistently strong performance reviews, had been passed over for promotion twice. Jason tried shifting blame onto his staff, saying certain employees were simply difficult to manage, that the labor pool in that part of Columbus was unreliable, that he was doing the best anyone could with the people available to him. Ryan pulled up the financial data on the screen behind him. On the surface, everything still looked strong. But Samuel pointed out the pattern underneath it, tracing it line by line. Jason had been generating short-term profit by cutting hours. Overtime worked was not being properly recorded. Turnover was quietly draining money into constant rehiring and retraining, and loyal customers at that location had started to decline. A slow erosion easy to miss if a person only looked at the top line. Samuel recounted in precise detail exactly what had happened to Amelia the day before. Jason tried to argue that Samuel did not understand the full situation because he had only observed a few minutes of it. Samuel replied that he had indeed only seen a few minutes, which was exactly why today they would examine 4 years. Elizabeth pulled Amelia's personnel file up on the shared screen for the room to see. Across 4 years, there had been no formal written warnings, frequent praise from customers recorded in the feedback system, and 2 separate recommendations that she be promoted to shift lead, both of which Jason had rejected without further remark. The reason he had recorded each time read simply, "lacks commercial judgment." Samuel asked him to define commercial judgment, genuinely curious how the phrase had been justified twice on paper. Jason said a manager's job was to generate profit. Samuel answered evenly that a company's job was to survive long enough to earn tomorrow's profit at all, and that a manager who could not keep people in the building had already failed at the only job that mattered. Still, Samuel did not fire him in that moment. He asked Elizabeth to open a formal investigation immediately, and Jason was suspended from his management duties pending its outcome. It was a deliberate, business-like choice, not an emotional one, and Samuel was careful to make sure everyone in the room understood the difference. He had not walked in wanting a spectacle. He wanted a record that would hold up, one built on documents rather than on the memory of a single uncomfortable morning. Samuel refused to let accusations stand without documentation to support them, no matter how confident he already felt about what he had witnessed himself. Before the meeting closed for the morning, he added one more instruction, quiet but unmistakable. He wanted Amelia brought in. Amelia had been sitting downstairs in the human resources waiting area for nearly an hour, hoping to get her termination record corrected, rehearsing what she would say if someone tried to argue with her about it. When Elizabeth came down personally to invite her upstairs, Amelia's stomach dropped a little, certain this meant Jason wanted another chance to pressure her into signing something. She followed Elizabeth up in silence, going over her reasoning one more time in her head. When the conference room door opened, she froze at the sight of Samuel standing at the head of the table, dressed now in a way that made yesterday's coat feel like something from another life. He rose to greet her. Amelia looked around the room, and understanding settled over her slowly. Her reaction was not relief but confusion. She asked if he had known who he was the whole time. Samuel said yes. Something in her tightened at that. She did not want her kindness turned into a secret test she never agreed to take part in. Samuel quickly clarified that he had not set out to trap her. He had come to observe how the location operated, and he had never intended for her to lose her job over it. That detail mattered because it kept him from becoming just another wealthy man playing games with people's lives to prove a point. He apologized, saying his own presence had unintentionally cost her a job she had held for 4 years. Amelia told him plainly that he had not fired her. Jason had. Samuel asked if she wanted her position back. She did not answer right away. She said the more urgent matter was fixing the reason listed on her termination. "I can find another job," she told him, "but I cannot walk into an interview with a file that says I stole." Elizabeth confirmed the company would freeze the termination decision while the investigation continued. Samuel asked Amelia what she believed was the biggest problem at the store. She did not use the moment to attack Jason personally. She simply described what she had watched happen over time, employees too afraid of making mistakes, every decision bending around a single day's numbers, good people quietly leaving and everyone else learning to stay silent. Logan noticed how she framed the issue as something larger than her own job as a server, something closer to a diagnosis than a complaint. Samuel asked her if she were running the store, what she would change first. Amelia answered without hesitating that she would make sure people no longer had to be afraid to tell the truth, even when the truth cost the store a few dollars on a bad day. Samuel said nothing in response, but Logan wrote the line down word for word, underlining it twice before closing his notebook. The investigation stretched across several days, focused entirely on evidence rather than emotion, exactly the way Samuel had insisted it would be from the start. Grace decided to give Elizabeth her account of what she had witnessed, sitting for nearly 2 hours as she walked through everything she had watched happen over the past year and had never felt safe enough to report. Once word spread that Samuel wanted a fair and thorough review and that no one would face retaliation for speaking honestly, several former employees agreed to come forward as well, some of them people who had left the company months earlier and assumed no one would ever ask. The findings surfaced one after another, each one small on its own but damning once assembled together. Jason had never taken money directly, which was likely why he had felt safe for so long. Instead, he routinely asked staff to clock out and then keep working through closing duties, meaning significant overtime went unpaid across months of shifts. Negative feedback from employees was repeatedly logged as unsubstantiated and never forwarded to the regional office, effectively burying every complaint before it could reach anyone with the authority to act on it. He had also stalled promotions for anyone capable of pushing back against him, and the actual volume of discarded food was higher than his report suggested, hidden behind a record-keeping system that was far from transparent and, as Elizabeth noted, appeared to have been designed that way on purpose. Amelia's case turned out to be especially serious. Internal camera footage confirmed she had checked with the kitchen staff before taking the food, that the portion had already been placed on the discard tray, and that Jason had heard her explanation in full yet still wrote in her file that she had taken commercial product without authorization. Elizabeth concluded the disciplinary record was not just harsh but deliberately misleading. Jason was called back in. He tried to defend himself by claiming Samuel was simply biased toward Amelia because she had given him food. Samuel did not argue the point. He let Elizabeth present the evidence instead. Logan added that Jason's results were not sustainable, that the store was losing staff faster than any comparable location in the region, and that the cost of constantly training replacements had quietly eaten away most of the savings he had bragged about. Finally, Jason turned his attack back toward Amelia, calling her too emotional to ever manage anyone, too soft for a job that required hard decisions under pressure. Samuel asked calmly whether someone who understood the value of a few dollars of food and the value of a human being at the same time could really be called emotional, or whether that was simply the kind of judgment a good manager was supposed to have. Jason had no answer for that either. What had started as a story about a founder defending one server had become something larger, something none of them had expected when the meeting began. A company being forced to examine itself in a mirror it had avoided looking into for far too long. The final meeting arrived a week later, held in the same conference room where everything had first come apart. Jason was given one last chance to speak, and for the first time since Samuel had walked through that door, his usual confidence seemed to falter. He admitted he had been too harsh at times, but insisted everything he had done was in service of higher profit, framing his choices as sacrifices made for the good of the company rather than mistakes made at the expense of the people beneath him. He asked to keep his position with a formal warning attached instead, offering to accept whatever conditions the board wanted to set. Samuel did not decide alone. Elizabeth confirmed that Jason had violated personnel procedure, produced a disciplinary record that was materially false, and engaged in wage practices around working hours that needed to be corrected immediately. Logan concluded that Jason no longer had the trust required to manage people. He was terminated through the company's formal process. At the same time, the company began reviewing unpaid overtime across the location, arranging repayment for affected employees, and reopening several old complaints that had been closed without proper resolution, a process Elizabeth promised would extend beyond Columbus if similar patterns turned up elsewhere. Samuel told Jason directly, without raising his voice, that he was not losing his job over a bowl of soup. He was losing it because he believed someone standing beneath him did not deserve to be treated with basic decency, and no amount of favorable numbers could make up for that. Jason left the room without another word. There was no mockery, no gloating from Samuel, nothing designed to humiliate him further on his way out. His downfall had come entirely from the evidence he himself had created. One dismissive decision at a time, long before Samuel had ever walked through the door in a worn coat. Samuel then turned to Amelia. The company formally erased the termination reason from her file, paid her for every day she had been suspended without cause, and issued written confirmation that no theft had occurred. Samuel offered to bring her back, though not immediately, as a store manager. To avoid the appearance of a wealthy owner handing out titles on emotion alone, Logan proposed something more measured. Amelia would join a 6-week management training program, and if she met the required benchmarks, she would be promoted to assistant manager. Amelia accepted without hesitation, relieved that the path forward felt earned rather than handed to her out of guilt. Samuel asked why she had not pushed for more after everything she had been through, curious whether she resented the slower path being offered. She told him that if she wanted a system built on fairness, she also had to be willing to be evaluated fairly herself, and that skipping every step would only leave her wondering, later, whether she had truly deserved the title. It was that answer, more than anything written in her file, that convinced the people in that room she genuinely had what it took to lead. 6 months passed. Amelia completed the training program near the top of her class, moved into the assistant manager role, and was later promoted to store manager based on results the numbers could not argue with. The same kind of numbers Jason had once used to defend himself, only this time built on a foundation that held up under scrutiny. Grace stayed on at the location and became shift lead, finally given the recognition that had been withheld from her for years. Across several locations, Harrison Table rolled out a new program allowing food that was still safe at the end of the day to be routed to a community organization through a clear, official process approved by corporate rather than left to individual discretion. Staff no longer distributed food on their own judgment, but waste stopped going straight into the trash, a compromise that satisfied both the accountants and the people who had always found the old system wasteful. Samuel did not name the program after Amelia, and Amelia did not want what she had done turned into a marketing story either. One winter afternoon, he returned to the location, still wearing the same worn coat. A newer employee did not recognize him. The young man greeted him warmly, offered him a seat, and asked what he needed. Samuel smiled. Amelia came out from behind the counter, noticed the familiar coat, and teased him about still enjoying being mistaken for someone in need. Samuel told her the coat reminded him why he opened his first restaurant at all. He told her that as a young man he once could not afford dinner at a small diner where he worked nearby, and the owner fed him anyway, telling him that if he ever had more than he needed, he should remember exactly how that moment felt. It was the final quiet turn of the story. Without knowing it, Amelia had repeated the same act of kindness that had shaped Samuel decades earlier, passing forward something she never knew she had inherited. He looked around the dining room, at the recovered revenue, the lower turnover, the rising customer reviews posted online by people who had no idea what had happened behind the scenes, and told her she had proven that decency and good business were never really opposites, no matter how many managers like Jason believed otherwise. Amelia corrected him gently. She said she had only given a hungry man a bowl of soup. Samuel answered that sometimes the way a person treats someone they believe can offer them nothing says everything worth knowing. In the kitchen that evening, the trays at closing no longer went straight into the trash. They were packed properly and sent where they were meant to go. The bowl of soup that once cost Amelia her job had become the reason an entire company changed how it saw people. Amelia never set out to prove anything that morning. She only saw someone cold and hungry and did what felt right without checking who he was or what it might cost her. That single choice ended up changing more than her own life. It changed how an entire company treated the people who kept it running, and it reminded everyone who heard the story that character rarely shows itself in the big, obvious moments. It shows itself in the small ones. In a bowl of soup handed across a counter to a stranger who seemed to have nothing to offer in return. If this story moved you, stay close, because more stories like this one are waiting, about ordinary people whose decisions end up mattering more than anyone expected. Come back for the next one.